actually, in my presentation, I was talking about the fact that the Great campaign kicked off because of the London Olympics. I suppose it might be, I mean, it's not my questions, but I mean, that's interesting because presumably that was a key moment for you guys as well, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. The 2012 Olympics was a really important moment, obviously for London as a city, but also for London and Partners, because we were created in 2011, so the year before the Olympics, by the then Mayor of London, Boris Johnson. You may remember him from some of his subsequent jobs that he also had. But at the time, he was Mayor of London, and in London there were some different promotional agencies. There was one for tourism that had been going since the 1960s. There was a different organisation that was doing some inward investment work, and there was a third organisation that was doing international student attraction. And Boris Johnson felt that we needed a single agency to do promotion and investment work, so he merged them in 2011 in time for the Olympics in 2012. So London and Partners is really a legacy of the 2012 Olympics.
So the questions that we agreed sort of start with the general and then they get to the more specific. The general question is, you know, you're obviously a key element of London's economic growth. Can you talk generally about what effect what you're doing and that London's brand has on the growth agenda, which obviously is right at the top of the political agenda at the moment?
Happy to. Well, we'd all like to know what effect our actions have on the growth of our cities or places, wouldn't we? That's the golden ticket. Maybe it's helpful if I just say a little bit about what London and Partners does, and then I can explain a bit about how we measure our impact. So London and Partners is the growth agency for London. So our mission is to create growth in the city, economic growth that is resilient and sustainable and inclusive. And to do that, we do four things. We do strategy, promotion, investment, and business growth. So the brand and the promotion work is a really important aspect of what we do, but it's just one of the pillars. So strategy is really about policy making. It's working with the stakeholders across London to set our economic policy and our growth strategy for different sectors. Promotion, I'm sure we'll talk a lot more about, but both the B2B, so for investors, and the B2C for tourists. Investment, we focus on foreign direct investment and also capital investment. So foreign direct investment, obviously attracting international scaling companies to expand and set up operations here. But we also do a lot of work on the capital investment side, attracting international institutional investors to invest in real estate, energy, and infrastructure in the city. And then finally, business growth is about supporting London-based companies to scale. So we run the small business support service for the city, and we also run an accelerator for scaling technology companies to grow internationally, and we curate the innovation ecosystem in London. So we run things like London Tech Week, London Life Science Week, and a bunch of other initiatives in the innovation ecosystem. So when we measure our impact, because we go a long way from brand through much more functional performance marketing through to investment and then to sales, if you like, we're able to we measure our outcomes based on the actual growth that we create that wouldn't otherwise have existed, rather than trying to measure our brand impact somewhere much higher up the funnel. So our headline key performance indicator is additional GVA, so additional growth. And we measure that on our trade work and on our investment work. And we measure that very specifically on the projects that we've won, where the clients that we've worked with, the investors, have to sign a form to say how much have they invested, how much of that they attribute to our support, would they have come earlier, would they have invested more because of our support. And that all goes into a big econometric model, and that's what creates our growth KPIs. And similarly with the businesses we support on export, they say, this is how much additional international deals I've won, and this is how much of it I attribute to the fact that you've supported me, to deals that you've introduced me to, investors that you've introduced me to. So we measure the growth that we create not through a brand metric, but through something that's much, much further down the sales funnel. Of course, we also track what we do in the world of promotion. Of course, we track reach and we track engagement and all of the usual things. And if we have a specific campaign, then of course we have metrics around a specific campaign. But to answer your question on how do we measure our impact on growth, we do that by measuring the end result of the growth that we create.
It's interesting. I mean, obviously, one of the things when we're doing our valuations is we're looking at long-term economic revenues as one of the elements to decide on a brand value. So obviously, we have to look at the underlying economic growth which comes from econometrics. So the model itself does have growth at lots of different levels, and then on top of it, we just say, well, here is the element that's contributed by the brand. So we're looking at both. The next question really is about governance and structure, which is a sort of fairly bland question. How does it work? Because listening to you, I was just struck by the fact that there are so many facets to what you're doing. It's incredibly complex, and you must have to be extremely decisive, but also incredibly diplomatic, far more so than most people who are running marketing campaigns. And it just makes me wonder, how does that structure and governance work, particularly vis-a-vis the tension between London government and national government? I mean, that thing that I said there was that the Great campaign started in 2011. You started in 2011. Is there a constant arm wrestle as to who gets resources and who tells who what to do? I mean, how does that all work?
Yeah, great question. No, there isn't actually, because our funding streams are quite different, and we work closely with the Great campaign because obviously London is heavily influenced by the UK brand, as all cities are influenced by their nation brands, but London's also a contributor to the UK nation brand. And whilst obviously the brands are linked, they're also quite distinct. So the perceptions that people have about London are not the same as the perceptions they have around the UK, which will tend to be more around things like heritage and culture and leisure tourism and education. London has those, but probably goes much more heavily on innovation and technology and finance and a global financial centre. So the positioning is a little bit different. This is a very rare period in that we have the same political party in national government and London government. They're both Labour. That's the first time that's been the case in, I think, 25 years. They've swapped over, but they've always missed each other. But in practice, that hasn't actually made a huge difference. London and Partners is a company limited by guarantee, for those of you who are interested in these things, where effectively our majority shareholder is the mayor. We are funded partly by grants from the mayor, partly by grants from national government, and then partly by private sector income, which is partnerships, sponsorships, e-commerce, advertising, and participation fees for our services. This year will be a roughly 70-30 split, something like that, public-private.
So when there's a dispute about anything, how is it resolved in the end? Is it the mayor just says the answer's X? Or what?
Well, what kind of dispute have you in mind? We tend to be very consensus-driven. Really. London's a negotiated city.
To be honest, I hadn't really thought about it in that amount of depth before now. But when it's rumbling through my head, I sort of think, that they say that. Well, so if you look at the way that Labour behaves, they seem to hate each other more than they hate the other side. A lot of the factions. So actually getting the factions to work together, and sometimes people make irrational decisions because they would quite like to see one of their political enemies do badly. Ultimately, in any organisation, whether it's corporate or not, there has to be someone who puts their foot down and says, well, this is the way we're going to do it. I just wonder, is there that amount of authority in Sadiq Khan, for example? Can he just say, well, that's the way we're going to do it? Of
course he can if he wants to. Of course he can if he wants to, because he's the principal funder, but I think he really values partnership and consensus.
Right.
And the reason that we're set up the way we are, and I think the reason we can be effective, is that we work really closely in partnership with businesses. So if we're doing work in the tourism sector, we're doing it with our hotels and our airports and our major attractions, and we're sitting with them and saying, what should the objectives be? Who should the audiences be? What are we trying to achieve with this? What are the markets we should be targeting? And of course, at the end of the day, if someone has to make a decision, we'll make it. But we're really trying to do it as much as we can as a team and as a partnership, not least because they're co-investing. So it's their money as well. And it would be the same thing where we're working in inward investment. So if we look at our working capital investment, that's actually principally funded by private sector developers. Real estate developers principally are funding our working capital investment. So they're very much involved with us in shaping what are the priority asset classes, what are the principal investors we should be going for, holding us to account for whether we're doing a good job. And I think that's really important because for me, we need to have the market and the market snapping at our heels and making us feel that burn of competition, that if we're not doing the things which will actually generate growth for their businesses, we're probably not doing the right things.
So on that subject of prioritization, I think that's a very interesting, how do the priorities get set? Presumably the two key things are, one is capacity and the other one is potential return. Now, tourism generally has got a bad name in the last few years in a lot of places. People say there's too much tourism, everywhere's too busy, and I've heard people say London is just too busy, we're full, forget tourism. Is that true? And how do you balance that thing, in particular in relation to London?
So when we're thinking about what we do, we're principally thinking about where can we make the biggest difference? Because London's a city of 9.5 million people, 12 million in the daytime, it's $1 trillion economy. We have the humility to know that with our £35 million, €40 million budget, the impact we can have is limited in an economy of that scale. And so most of London sorts itself out. What we need to be thinking is, what are the things we can do that will genuinely make a difference? And so one of the really important things we look at is market share. Where can we do something where our intervention will be on a scale that's meaningful in the London economy? So to give you an example, if we look in the foreign direct investment space, about a third to a half of all the international tech companies that set up new operations in London have come through us. We've supported those companies in. So we have a really meaningful market share there. Similarly, if we look at scale-up companies, not startups, but scale-ups, about a fifth of all the companies that will ever raise venture capital at a kind of Series A+ at scale-up stage in London will have been through our accelerator program. So we have a meaningful market share. A few years ago, we chose to stop doing student recruitment. We don't do student recruitment anymore. Why? We just didn't think our market share was meaningful. With the budgets we had, we couldn't get a media spend that was going to make a difference that you could measure to London's international student recruitment market. So we're not going to do things that are just performative so it looks like we're doing something. We'll only do it if we think on the scale of the whole market that is actually material. So I think for us that helps with prioritization. Your question on tourism is a good one. I think London is in a different place to a lot of other European cities on tourism. There isn't a live public debate really on over-tourism, and public support for tourism is pretty high, actually, and if you look at opinion polling on tourism. I think that's partly just geographic, in that it's a very large and spread out city. So unlike places like maybe a Barcelona or an Amsterdam, where the tourists are really stuck in a very small geography, London actually has quite a lot of space. But we don't take that for granted, and we're really keen to make sure that we continue to have really high public support for the benefits of tourism. And a big part of that is, making sure that our tourists do visit as much of the city as possible, partly so that they're spread out, but also so that lots of different communities feel that benefit because they're getting that additional tourism spend. And that's one of the real priorities in our programme around what we call the experience economy or tourism, is developing new, really great visitor destinations in addition to the kind of big city centre visitor destinations. But for now, I wouldn't say that's a particularly live political issue, for now.
So in my presentation, I talked about John Deere. By a weird coincidence, they turn over about $9.5 to $10 billion, which is about the same as you said London.
No, trillion.
Trillion. Oh, trillion, I beg your pardon.
9.5 to 10 million humans.
Okay, well, that makes my point even more. They have a $240 million budget each year against $10 billion. I'm not going to ask you what you think your budget should be, but let's imagine they gave you 200 million. Do you actually think that you would get a high return if you were just suddenly out of the blue given 200 million?
Yes.
This wasn't a rehearsed question, by the way.
Of course.
So
Of course we could invest 200 million and get a high return on it. When we've done large-scale tourism marketing in the past, we've been getting return on investment of 40 to 50 to 1. So we're pretty confident that we can get a good return when we do invest. But I also don't think if we had an extra 200 million, we would necessarily spend it all on promotion or brand or place branding.
But don't you think that's a bit of a weird conundrum? That you can sit there and go, yeah, I think I could get a 10 times return or whatever it is. You would think logical people, if they're going for growth, would say, well, here's 200 million then.
You would think, but the conundrum that we all, the challenge that we all, I'm sure, colleagues deal with every day is that place branding has benefits which are extremely diffuse and intangible. And that is a real challenge for politicians because they cannot demonstrate in a tangible enough way to their constituents what the benefit is. And that's not a data problem because giving people the data isn't going to change their minds. So there are only two ways to fix it. Either we have to have real conviction politicians who have the political strength to say, I believe in this, I'm prepared to spend money on it even though it's risky and it might not make me very popular because I think it's the right thing to do. That's one option. Sometimes we're in that position and that's nice when we are. Or we have to be able to capture some of the benefit of the promotion for specific groups so that they can feel specific benefit. So maybe it's the tourism sector. You can capture enough value for the tourism sector that it's meaningful for them. Maybe it's your real estate developers. You can capture enough value that it's meaningful for them and they'll, in both cases, will therefore also contribute to it. But I think it's a very tough ask to most politicians to say, I mean, the amount of money you're talking about is bigger than the entire discretionary budget of the mayor outside of policing and transport.
Yeah, but I think at a broad level, the same argument applies generally with marketing.
Sure.
Particularly in B2B and other sectors. You know, it may have been accepted in B2C. You know, if you look at some of the big B2C companies, they spend 10% of turnover. You know, Kellogg's spend billions. McDonald's spend billions. You know, it is illogical what's going on.
It is, in some ways. A different way of looking at it is to say, with a city like London, which has high visitation and high awareness, the product is the brand. And that's what we believe. The experience of London is the brand. We know that by far our most effective marketing channel is word of mouth. And what drives word of mouth is people coming here, experiencing the city, and then telling other people about it. So the thing that we should focus on is not necessarily lots of money on advertising campaigns, but improving the experience so that when people come here, they have a great experience and they go and talk about it. And that's not just when they come here as a tourist, it's also when they come here for business, they're in London for a conference, they're here because their children are studying here, whatever it is. And that's why a big focus for us is improving the London experience, because we think the return we can get on that is probably higher than if we just throw money at
So is your role in relation, I mean, placemaking, experience and all that kind of thing, is obviously, it's not discretionary marketing money, communications money, it's actually doing something. But you don't have the budgets to do that. So yeah, what is the role? Is it drawing attention to the things that are already going on, or is it behind the scenes making sure that they do it better? I mean, personally, we got a house in Cornwall, I go Cornish gig rowing a lot. And every year, a whole bunch of teams come and do the Great London River Race. But the amount of, the experience as a participant is not that great, because they clearly don't have a great deal of money, particularly at the finishing line. It's a shit show, frankly, but it's still extremely popular, and yet it's also not even widely promoted, and yet it's a fantastic event. And you sort of think, well, you know, what can you do about sort of things like that when you don't have budgets?
So the things we can do are use our inward investment levers and use data and intelligence and advisory. So we are looking at what are the future consumer trends, what do people want now, and where do we have problems with the London experience now? But really importantly, what are people going to want next? And we can see very clearly those trends, which I'm sure you're all aware of, around experience and well-being and food and drink and immersive and so on. So we, through our inward investment work, are looking around the world for the best experiences, activations, events, and proactively trying to bring those into London. So we are going and seeing them and saying, you've got an amazing experience, we want it in London, can we help you find a site, can we help you hire staff, can we help you navigate local permitting and licensing and all of these issues to try and get them into the city. So we are actively trying to curate the experience. To give you an example, we know that London is lacking a major indoor arena. So we have 2 big indoor arenas, they're completely full. Nobody can get into them. We have easily enough demand for another indoor arena. We're working with a bunch of different investors who are bringing options for how can we build a new indoor arena. That's an example. So we are proactively trying to curate the London experience to make it better. Sometimes it's also about dealing with some of the pain points to the extent we can. So for example, and I think we'll talk about this later, we know that there's been issues lately with mobile phone theft. So how can we be working with local councils and with the police? The police are doing a lot to address that. We need to make sure people know that that's being addressed and that the problems with mobile phone theft are significantly improving in London. So there's a bunch of things we can do. We spend a lot of time working with local placemakers, whether that's local government or private developers who own the new areas, helping them think through, what do I want this place to be famous for? What are the different pieces I need to bring together? We'll then support them with some marketing for it, support them with the inward investment piece. So I'd love to have more resources for that, but we're trying to curate the experience and improve the visitor experience as best we can.
So one thing I haven't mentioned yet is that in our city index, London has come top twice.
Thank you.
According to Wesley. Nothing to do with me. It's global opinion that London is a great place. But you know, one of the things which is going on a lot is what do you call it? Fake news. You know, like cyber, whatever you call it.
Disinformation.
People trying to mess it up for you. And the amount of money that's being spent on the disinformation is probably more than the amount on the positive information. How can you deal with that?
This is a real issue for London, and the mayor has spoken out about it quite a lot recently. It's becoming increasingly clear, and there's increasing evidence, that there are very organised, well-resourced, state-sponsored disinformation campaigns against London that are sharing myths about London in terms of crime and safety, and particularly Islamophobic myths about London. Now, one of the dangers that comes with being a very high-profile city that is one of the most diverse and multicultural cities in the world, that's democratic and open, that has a Muslim mayor, is that there are forces who want us to fail. They want us to fail because of what we stand for. Our values make us a target. And we know that that's the case. So what can we do about it? We're working very closely with government, who are working through their own resources to try and tackle some of this state-sponsored information warfare that's happening across the UK, but particularly in London. We're trying to talk about it more to inoculate people, because the evidence shows that if people understand that there's a lot of fake news about London, when they see something, they're more likely to stop for a second and think, oh, actually, is it true that there are actually Sharia law in London? Is it true that there are ISIS gun points in London? No, probably not, is it? So we're trying to do that inoculation work. And then working with the social media platforms so that when disinformation is flagged, it is taken down quickly. Is it perfect? Absolutely not. But for those who are Europeans in the room, we are in a war. We are in a war, and the war happens also online, and the war happens also in London.
So we started a bit late, so have we got 5 minutes more? I will allow, say, 2 questions from the audience. One there, you had your hand up first.
Thank you very much. Arif Zaman. I think 2018 was a bit of a high point for London because it hosted the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting, and we've also had big events coming from the Commonwealth to London over the years. Can I just ask you, from where you sit in terms of the international dimensions of what you talked about, bringing particularly a large-scale Commonwealth event, and there are so many of those from different Commonwealth organisations, bring them to London. Is there something that London can also benefit from, using that halo effect in both directions from the Commonwealth brand, both in terms of highlighting its strength, but also pushing outward through the Commonwealth in terms of its messaging? Thank you.
Yeah, good question. For those who aren't familiar with the term Commonwealth, the Commonwealth is the group of countries that were formerly part of the British Empire and some others that have joined since. Generally, we would take a more data-driven approach, and we would prioritize markets based on where we see the greatest trade and investment opportunities. Some of those happen to be Commonwealth countries, principally India, Canada, and Australia, being the most significant major Commonwealth trade markets for us. And I think we would probably continue to take a data-led approach to which markets we would prioritize. India is our biggest foreign direct investment partner now. We have more FDI wins from India than we do from the US. It overtook the US a couple of years ago. We've been expanding our team in India. That's a really big focus for us.
I'm part of the Commonwealth from Australia, but an observation, if you don't mind. When I saw this name, London and Partners, and since we're at a branding event, and how you described what you do does not reflect the brand. Your brand, I thought it was like a legal firm or an accounting firm. So I just wanted to give you a suggestion. Maybe you call it like London Universe or London Everything, because this is what you're doing. Just an observation.
Free brand advice. Excellent. One more, perhaps from over there. Does anyone want to ask a question?
Hi, Laura. This is Aziz. I'm running a newspaper called London Daily, and I'm the CEO of forthcoming London Economic Forum. I'll talk to you about that later. So you mentioned 3 sectors you are focusing. One is real estate, energy, and infrastructure. Are we missing the key structure, the finance? Because...
Yes, sorry if I wasn't clear. Those are the 3 asset classes we focus on for capital investment. So capital investment into the built environment. So we do real estate, energy, and infrastructure. Of course, financial and professional services is very important for London. We work very closely with actually the City of London Corporation, whose building we're in today. and we have a very good working partnership with them. They tend to focus on what the traditional financial and professional services, so banking and insurance and wealth management and so on, and we tend to focus on the more technology end, so fintech, cyber, reg tech, legal tech, and so on, and that works well.
I think I'm probably going to have to draw this to a conclusion so we can get to the next presentation, which is from Turkey, talking about their experience. So I'd just like to say thank you very much. That was
Thanks,
fantastic.
David.
The one thing I would say is, in my opinion, your budget's too small. You need far more budget, far more resources, because the opportunity is huge.
Well, I won't disagree with that.
Anyway, thank you.